moving in speeds with new concepts in reaching greater heights. MTC Group. We value scrap. Moving in speeds with new concepts in reaching greater heights. MTC Group. We value scrap. Moving in speeds with new concepts in reaching greater heights. MTC Group. We value scrap. Moving in speeds with new concepts in reaching greater heights. MTC Group. We value scrap. Moving in speeds with new concepts in reaching greater heights. MTC Group. We value scrap. Moving in speeds with new concepts in reaching greater heights. MTC Group. We value scrap. Moving in speeds with new concepts in reaching greater heights. MTC Group. We value scrap. Moving in speeds with new concepts in reaching greater heights. MTC Group. We value scrap. Moving in speeds with new concepts in reaching greater heights. MTC Group. We value scrap. Moving in speeds with new concepts in reaching greater heights. MTC Group. We value scrap. Moving in speeds with new concepts in reaching greater heights. MTC Group. We value scrap.
Joining us for today's webinar. My name is Monica Bachchan. Ruchika ma'am, you are audible and we are live now. I request you to please mute your mic. Thank you, ma'am. And please turn on your camera. Sorry, viewers. Hello and welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Monica Bachchan. I'm a founder of Metalogic Projects Management Services. It is a maximum women staff organization. Today, on 24th of September 2020, we are presenting you webinar on steel scrap recycling processes, sponsored by NMDC Limited, SMC Power Generation, Dave Energy, and our advertiser MCT Group. This is our 15th webinar during COVID-19 period. Just a short housekeeping before we get started. If you have any questions during the panel discussion, please type them into the question box in your GoToWebinar control panel. I will bring them up during the presentation, and we will also have time for questions at the end. Always mention your company name and organization which you are representing and who you would like to address your question to. Indian steel scrap in supply amounted to 25 million tons in the country's 2019, 18 and 19 fiscal year, according to its Ministry of Steel. The ministry expects supply to rise by 38 to 39 million tons by 2024 and 25. India imported 7.5 million tons of steel scrap in 2019. Archiving scrap self-sufficiency would be challenging for India because scrap demand will continue to be significant, higher than supply in India, as there is a need to fulfill the country's target to 300 million tons per year steel scrap production by 2030. Fresh regulatory changes and government mandates are required to raise the consumption of scrap metal in India, and they need to be expedited to meet India's growing demand in the year to come. I would like to introduce today's expert panel to you all. Each panelist will get about 8 minutes, and then we will begin with the Q&A from audience. Our today's expert panel are Shri B.N. Satpathy, Senior Consultant, Office of Principal Scientific Advisor, Cabinet Secretariat, Government of India. Srimati Ruchika, Govil, IRS, Joint Secretary at Ministry of Steel, Government of India. Mr. Sumit Issar, MD at Mahindra, Accelo, Director at Cero Recycling. Mr. Sanjay Mehta, President at MRAI and Director at MTC Group. Mr. I.V. Rao, Visiting Senior Fellow, TERI, former ex-advisor, engineering and director at Maruti Center of Excellence. Mr. Reinoud, Pijpers, director at International Ship Recycling Association. Mr. Ritesh Mahenshwari, executive director, International Trade, Shabro Metals and Technologies. Mr. Archit Aggarwal, business manager at Dave Energy. We will begin with Mr. B.N. Satpathy. I'll give a little introduction about him. He's a postgraduate in economic from JNU and MPhil in economic and public administration from Punjab University. He holds a professional degree from Manchester Institute of Technology, USA in public administration. Mr. Satpathy has a rich 40 years of experience at all levels with Government of India at various critical departments. Currently, he is a senior consultant, Office of Principal Scientific Advisor, Cabinet Secretariat at Government of India. Now, I would request Mr. Satpathy to please give an opening remark and add value to this webinar by sharing his knowledge and thoughts. Mr. Satpathy, I request you to please unmute yourself. Over to you, sir.
Yeah.
Over to you.
Distinguished panelist, Mrs. Ruchika Govil, Joint Secretary, Minister of Steel. Very good afternoon to all of you. At the outset, let me thank Metalogic PMS Private Limited for giving me this opportunity to share my thoughts on the subject of today's webinar, which is steel scrap recycling process. How did I get into this is the first thing that I will dwell on. In 2017 November, when I was at Niti Aayog, we brought out a strategy for resource efficiency. One of the recommendations of that was there is the need to have sectoral studies on how do you attain resource efficiency and circular economy. Then in January 2019, along with the Ministry of Steel, we produced a report, which is the resource efficiency and circular economy of the steel. I must acknowledge here the contribution of Mrs. Govil to that report. And she has seen that report and was a party to the whole recommendation. Now, one of the recommendations of that was that we need to go to circular economy in the steel production and produce as much steel as possible through the scrap method. So, in pursuance to that, two things happened. One was the Ministry of Environment and Forest took cognizance of the recommendation, came out with a resource efficiency policy. Ministry of Steel has come with a scrap policy, and Ministry of Transport is also considering that. So this is the background to what is my involvement in the process. So I will briefly talk about three things. Why recycle? Why still recycle? Why not plastic? Why not textiles? And thirdly, what is the way forward in this recycling journey? Now, recycling is a key part of the circular economy. Even each year, the seventh resource that is called recyclables saves over 700 million tons of carbon dioxide emissions and is projected to increase to 1 billion ton by 2030. It is essential to save the planet, and this is the only way why you have to go to the recycling mode. Now, what is seventh resource? Now, water, air, oil, natural gas, coal, and minerals are the six resources that you have. And the seventh resource is recycled. So this is the most fundamental thing that we have to understand. Seventh resource is going to be the game changer in the whole process. Now, what is the advantage of this? It will combat climate change. And most important, which I'm looking at, is boost local economy and also GDP. Now, 1.6 million employment has been created worldwide by the recycling industry. And around the contribution to global GDP to every year is going to be $400 billion US in the next 10 years. And 20 billion is involved each year to improve the recycling process. These are the data which is given in the public domain. Now I come to the next one. Why still recycling? Why not? Government has many priorities. Plastics is one, textiles is other. So why is this a priority today, still recycling? Should the government devote resources there? The government is all about priorities and where do you spend the money. Now, if you go back to the history, the second 5-year plan, which was based on rapid industrialization, steel was the major industry which came up. And thanks to that industrial policy resolution in the second 5-year, today, India is the second largest producer of steel. Yes, it is a linear economy model till date. Now we have Prime Minister's vision of Atmanirbhar Bharat. Now, if we are the second producer of in the world of steel, crude steel, you are also the second most importer of scrap. Let's understand that also. So if you have to use scrap, then you have to get this domestic supply augmented through various schemes, through various policies, and one of them is the steel policy, still the scrap policy. That is where we are today. So Atmanirbhar Bharat is the final goal. And from the second 5-year plan till date, what we have achieved, we must go circular now and try to produce the scrap in the domestic market. Now, how do you do that? How will it happen? And I will not go to since Mrs. Ruchira is here, she will speak about that. What the steel policy, scrap policy is all about and how they want to go about it. But it is a priority of the government. And there is absolutely no doubt about that, in addition to other things like plastics. Now, what is the way forward? In the policy, the beginning and perhaps it will be a panacea for all our path of recycling. No, it will not be. One thing I think, Mrs. Govil, you may like to dwell on that also. Technology is going to be the key parameter in the recycling process. Development of technology to recycle today's minerals will provide the base for recycling of future materials. This is not the beginning of the whole process. So you must invest in technology of recycling. R&D is going to be an important part, which I did not see in the scrap policy, which perhaps may be an input. You may like to consider that. Worldwide technology need to be tracked in recycling. This is not a standalone country. Atmanirbhar Bharat doesn't mean that you isolate yourself and deglobalize and go on in the way that you have been going so far. And information on the latest technology of steel recycling, there is no end to it, and there has to be a beginning have to be made here. And I think Ministry of Steel has a pivotal role to play in this. And lastly, but not the least, identify technology gaps in this recycling process. Not merely the processing, not merely the aggregators, not merely the scrap holders. That the technology gaps are very important. Can you collect through a better technology? Can you aggregate through a better technology? Can you process? I understand that the Maruti Suzuki had the JV coming up with Toyota and Mahindra, so Issar is also here. He's also coming up with a plan and processing of the scrap process. I wish them all the best, but this is the beginning we're going to make. And I'm glad Ministry of Steel representative are here. You may like to consider technological inputs in the whole process. I'll conclude here and we'll look forward to your address in different areas that you have. And I'm sure Ministry of Steel will play a pivotal role, which they have till date. Not only from second producer, but the first producer, not only through the view of technique, but also from the scrap-based skill making. Thank you so much.
Right, sir. Thank you so much, Secretary, sir. And now we will move on to our next panelist. And thank you so much, Ruchika ma'am, for accepting our invitation. And finally, you have made it. So now I request Ruchika Govil, madam, to please unmute your mic and share your thoughts with us.
Good afternoon. I'm happy to be here on this panel today. I can see a lot of familiar faces, a lot of persons I've interacted with in the past 3 years since I have started dealing with this issue of scrap policy in the government of India. For me, it's been a learning curve. Each stage, each interaction, I have only gained and learned from the colleagues I see here on the panel today and other persons with whom I've interacted. The learning curve continues. Mr. Satpathy has played a very important role in my understanding this sector. Scrap, as all of us here, everybody here is more knowledgeable than me, I'm sure, in this regard, is the most important secondary source of steel. And now that the country has reached a certain level of maturity in its steel usage, in the past year, prior to 20 years, a lot of steel has been used, and now that steel is ready to be scrapped. And that scrap is to be used for further steel production. It only enhances the 6R principle and how we can do it in an environmentally sound fashion is the challenge we now have to address. The government has realized the importance of scrap and has been working assiduously from the top level to every forum. It has been addressing the issue of how to garner the scrap. The country today imports 7 million tons, and these 7 million tons, we are sure, can be found within the country and can be harnessed. In fact, the 25 million ton, which is currently also being currently processed and that scrap is being used, I'm sure we can do a better job in how to garner that scrap, how we can actually use the scrap, and how it can be processed in a more environmentally sound fashion. This brings us to the question of moving the scrapping industry from its present unorganized sector to the organized sector, the challenges that it involves, and how to take it forward, keeping in mind the kind of interest that is the vested interest, the economic interest of all the parties which are currently also involved in the scrapping business. How to make that transition? That is an important challenge the government has to face. Also the challenge of finding the scrap which is currently lying around but has not, I would say old steel lying around but which has not got effectively scrapped and has not come into the production process of making further steel. These two challenges which were before us, we framed the National Steel Policy in 2017. And in 2019, the follow-up policy was the Steel Scrap Recycling Policy, which came out in November 2019. All the persons here, I'm sure, have been through it and read every word. It is only a framework. It is a facilitator policy. It is actually to get parties together to make the roadmap ahead. And in this regard, I would like to say now that about 6-7 months have elapsed, we have been consistently taking measures. We are in interaction with other ministries in the government. We have interacted extensively with MORTH, which is to be the source of the end-of-life vehicles. We have interacted extensively with MOEF to say what should be the categorization of the scrapping industry. Is it to be red? Is it to be orange? And whether it could be green? And I'm happy to tell the audience here, as I'm sure a lot of people would already be aware, that now it has been categorized as an orange level industry. What Mr. Satpathy mentioned is a very important part, is the technologies that are to be used for scrapping industry, by the scrapping industry. It is important here to point out, and it's a rather sort of matter of concern, that the country today does not even have a single shredder. A shredder is what produces quality scrap, but the country does not, on an economic, as a business model, have a single scrapping machine, a shredding machine. All the shredding is being done manually through gas cutters, through baling, etc., which, while it's serving the purpose, is perhaps not the optimal method, the optimal way to go. So on the technology gap, the absence of a shredder is much felt. And this I can say so because we interact a lot with the induction arc furnace steel producers. They say that the steel we produce from scrap is as good as the scrap we put in. If the scrap has certain problems, it has certain impurities, at the induction arc furnace level, it is difficult to process. And therefore, the steel that gets produced therefrom is not cannot be used for high value added steel or would contain impurities, which we need to, it's a technology that we need to address. So therefore, I would say that it's very important that we have good processed scrap, and a shredder would definitely go a long way. But we have to make it a commercially viable option for anybody who intends setting up a shredding unit. Also, the technology gap exists today in setting up a scrapping center, that all the small machines that are currently being used by the organized scrapping center are all being imported. Now, these are not very high on technology machines, but there is a problem that the country is not producing the machines that could be used for example, dismantling an end-of-life vehicle. All those machines are currently being imported. They are not very high in value. But if the country was to see a boom of an organized scrapping business of ELVs, there will be a huge demand. And in that regard, we must have the dismantling machines, the shredding machines, the scrapping machines, which is way beyond what is happening currently in the manual gas cutting baling fashion. We must develop this technology as well. Mr. Satpathy, I think I must tell you that in our steel scrap policy, we have made an element for R&D. We do look forward to, even Ministry of Steel will be supporting R&D measures in this regard in both the aspects that I was talking about, not only for scrap, but also producing steel from scrap, where R&D would play an important role, very sensitized to this matter. It is important that the sector which is currently working more in the unorganized sector be given certain formal recognition, make that transition, make it environmentally more friendly, to make it more energy efficient, to make efficiencies along the way. In this regard, we also feel that the state governments, the local governments, the municipal governments, the role of the district collectors, etc., will have to play a very important role in this regard. In fact, last month we've been in active touch with MRAI in this regard to say, how can we make the transition? How can we better the quality of life of the people who are working in those sectors? We cannot wish them away. They have to be incorporated in the formal scrapping sector for this economy. What are the measures? We see a role in this regard to be played by the NGOs, to be played by the socially awareness creation groups, by the local administrative governments, in taking this matter forward. While we can always say that we need a lot active intervention of the State Pollution Control Board, the Central Pollution Control Board, but this cannot be a measure that we can drive only by a stick method. We are very aware that the number of people employed in the sector today are large, and we have to provide and we have to give incentives for them to move into a formal scrapping center. The gap that exists today of 7 million tons, we see a lot of that coming from a variety of scraps. Here we do not talk only in terms of construction scrap or mill scrap or end-of-life vehicle scrap or domestic scrap or even the household scrap. Each product of steel that was produced in the past, and I put that benchmark at about before 20 years, can be harnessed for producing quality scrap and can go back into either the induction arc furnace, electric arc furnace, or the blast furnace and produce good quality steel. And in fact, if the scrap that we are looking at has alloys in them, then those alloy materials are of great and immense value. Those alloys actually reduce the cost of producing high value, high end steel. If the high value scrap steel is to be segregated, it has to be processed, it has to be shredded, and then it reaches the correct steel making facility. Then the additional requirement of alloys that have to be further added to produce high quality, high value added steel would perhaps be reduced. Therefore, there's an economic value in processing this high value alloy steel. In this regard, we have also been in contact and we've been in discussions with the shipping industry. Alang Shipping is one of the biggest shipbreaking facilities in the world. If that scrap is coming, and I know this forum here at Steel Ministry has not been addressing the steel scrap matters. We look at all others other than shipping scrap. But if we were to look at the economy as a whole, the scrap that is coming from shipping, it also is very high value scrap. That also needs to be processed. Question is, and that has often been asked, do we take it straight for an end use? Do we just roll it and go ahead? But when we talk to the various scientists, the steel producers, they always feel that scrap is never best re-rolled and reused. It is best always to use scrap as an input material for steel processing, and then the quality of steel we get is purer, stronger, and more BIS certified. I think everybody here is aware that now we are having more and more grades and more BIS standards on steel, and those are all being now covered in QCOs. If we are going to be in a regime of quality steel in the country, quality steel produced in the country and quality steel imported in the country, then it is very important that scrap, which does not have standards, but we must have certain ISRI-related guidelines, they be followed. Those ISRI-related guidelines be followed for segregation, how to garner that scrap, how to use it forward. we have to move to a system which is not just the kabadi wala selling some scrap. It has to be in a more standardized, in a more formal fashion. In this regard, we have in the steel scrap policy talked about the hub and spoke model. If we were to have a 4:1, I mean, that is a very broad structure on which we were working. The hub and spoke need not be related to only 4:1. It could be many more. But if we were to have 4:1 dismantling centers, feeding, shredding centers, then we could have shredding, most shredder facilities in the country, and that would work very well. By this, it would be available in the smallest of districts, smallest of towns in this regard, where we could get the kabadi walas to play the role of aggregators. They could be given badges, given recognition, given social securities. When they were to feed to a dismantling center, the dismantling centers do the depollution, take out, because nowadays even cars are actually mini computers. So you will have to take out all the electronic, all the rubber, the plastics, the other valuables like copper, etc. They should be all removed. And those materials that are then taken out after segregation be handed over to the shredding centers, and the shredding centers be incorporated in the GST network, and that GST network captures the values for the economy in the formal sector and then shifted. While we are aware that this might sound a little utopian at this stage, I assure the audience here that we are in constant interaction, and today's interaction also being one of, in that direction, that we are here to listen to what further measures need to be done. A lot of papers have been written in this regard within the ministry. Some are in public domain and some are not. But each of those papers has taken inputs from the stakeholders who are going to operationalize, because the government will have no role in setting up any of those centers. It will only play a facilitator mode. Wherever policy is required, wherever guidelines are required, the government will come forward. Wherever R&D is required, R&D could be facilitated by the government. But eventually, it has to be an economic model, pretty much worked by the private sector, pretty much delivered within the organized sector, with all the environmental and tax laws followed. And then only we move towards employment generation, capital goods generation, capital generation, quality of life generation for everybody in the economy related to scrap. I think a lot of people will have a lot more to say in this regard. Even if I'm not seeing visually, I am listening to everybody. I do have to attend some matters on the side, but I'm listening to all that, and otherwise I'm sure Monica will share a lot of that. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ruchika ma'am, for highlighting the major points of scrap policy. And I totally agree with you that somewhere we have to, change this notion of kabadi wala. I think we must call them a recycle man than just a kabadi wala, because they are playing a very important role, and they will be the game changer in the future. Now we will move on to our next panelist. We have Mr. Sumit Issar, Managing Director of Mahindra Accelo and Director at Cero Recycling. A little brief about Mr. Sumit. Sumit is a mechanical engineer, honors from Birla Institute of Technology, and a postgraduate in marketing with over 21 years of experience in the steel domain. Sumit started his career as a graduate engineer trainee in 1995 with M&M Intertrade Division. Sumit has played a pivotal role in successfully forming Cero, Mahindra MSTC Recycling Private Limited, a joint venture between Mahindra Intertrade Limited and MSTC to establish India's first authorized vehicle recycling facility at Greater Noida. This facility is India's first in organized sector, fully compliant, and focuses on pollution-free recycling. Mr. Sumit is having a presentation. Sumit sir, I request you to please unmute your mic, and I'm making you a presenter.
Thanks, Monica. I've done that. Can you give me a sharing of the screen?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, okay. So just check and confirm to me that you can see the screen.
Absolutely, sir. It's visible to us.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone, especially the distinguished panelists and all our guests. It's been an honor to be here. I just realized that, especially being a part of Metalogic for a company dominated by women, 80%, that's something very great. Because whenever we talk about steel, I think I always believe that women do a better job, especially in my company, in terms of trading and scrap and all. And so I was very happy, and when I heard Monica saying at the start that they've been dominated by women workforce. So just coming to the topic, we are India's first automotive recycling and steel facility. Cero is what we created as a brand. It's one of the most popular brands now across the country. Frankly, if you do a Google search today in most of the cities, Cero would come in the top 2 or top 3. And the kind of response we have got from the customers in India has been very good. Of course, the conversion ratios, I would say, as we move, will improve because this is a new concept. It's a new market getting created. I also must compliment here the Steel Ministry, the Government of India, for the visionary leadership, in a sense, like when we wanted to form this joint venture, they understood the values which we wanted to stand for and to bring the first of its kind facility in India. And that's where the Cero got created. Cero actually means zero in Spanish, in case for your interest. And so we created this brand, and the idea was that we want to have sustainable and eco-friendly ways of recycling in India. Now, why did we start this business? Just to give you an idea. When we look at data, and that's where we focus on a lot, India has huge population of vehicles which are aged more than 15 years. Now, if you look at about 2025, we'll have about 127.8 million vehicles, primarily two-wheeler vehicles, which are about 60-70%. In 2020, it's about 81 million. And what it shows is the number of vehicles are too many. And this will keep on expanding because Indian sales, automotive sales, actually exponentially increased from 2005 onwards. So we believe there are a lot of vehicles available. Of course, many of these vehicles would have been recycled or would have met with its fate in different ways in the unorganized sector. And we are here to make sure that going forward, at least people do have a chance of recycling it in the best possible way. I think some of the panelists talked about the scrap requirements in the country. Now, we have done our research that India imported about 6 million tons of scrap in 2015. Last year was about 7.5 million, and 24 million tons were regenerated in the country itself. But if this policy does come in and if it's effective, we can actually generate from about 50 to 55 million tons of scrap in the country. And the imports will be, of course, growing forward because the country would need, as the steel productions will increase from 100 million to 200 million, another 10 to 12 million. So, but the advantage is that steel can be more recycled. The country can actually save on foreign exchange close to $2 billion a year, and you will have more of local availability. So there's a big advantage as far as steel recyclability is concerned. Now, why do we say automotive recycling or steel recycling is important? Now, in a car or a vehicle, if you talk about, it has steel, 650 kgs per vehicle. It's got aluminum, it's got copper, and then steel, of course, we know it goes into melting and making secondary steel like TMT, billets and all. In case of aluminum, it can again be recycled back for many of the precious parts, and same applies for copper. And what we are doing in Cero in going forward is actually looking at technology tie-ups with leading players in the world, where we want to more and more create more value from these old vehicles which are coming in. So right now we are focusing on steel. Of course, we have started now making bales, and we are now supplying to many of the steel foundries directly. So we started ensuring that this good quality scrap goes back and gets converted into steel scrap and eventually into billets. On the other hand, we are now looking at, in the next 1 year, maybe 1.5 years, how can we look at copper and aluminum? They can be recycled back in the industry. And the same applies to many other parts, including the e-waste. So for e-waste, we are looking at a completely new technology to bring in, where we can actually formalize the e-waste market. in that sense. So technology is going to be a very important part of our joint venture as we move forward in Cero, and I think that would help us to create more value. Now, with these objectives, of course, the Cero was created. The idea was we will ensure that we will do this recycling properly and make sure that all the discharges are treated again in a proper and hygienic manner. We are India's first authorized recycler in the NCR region. They've given us a license, and so it also creates a lot of responsibility. And I was listening to some of the people out here that how have we tried to create an ecosystem in the Delhi region is with all the unorganized players. Right now we are talking. We are trying them to be a part of us. We're trying to create, I think our team is working on one of the biggest platforms, which we will be launching for the end-of-life vehicles, where we will be connecting all the unorganized fellows in the market. And that we will do the testing in the North region. And as we move forward, that testing, we will take it to various cities, where all these small kabadiwalas and all will get into a formalized system. And we really don't know how the results will pan out. But if we really are able to do that well, we can ensure that they will also start increasing their income. We will ensure their income increases, and also everybody in the chain can make money out of the system. What we are looking at is in the matter of next 1 or 2 years to increase our base to 25 centers. For this, we are looking at localizing all our equipments. In fact, Cero is working on designing its own equipments, and we will be selling those equipments in the market in the next 1 year from now. So I think there was another point which was made, equipments which are right now imported because nobody actually bothered to make it in India. As a part of Atmanirbhar, we will be making in India. We will not only supply to our collection centers, but we will actually be able to supply to anyone and anyone, because we believe we need to have more and more localization done on this. So already we are in the final stages of design, and I think implementations will happen as we move forward. The scrappage policy, we believe, is a win-win for all, frankly. The reason we are saying is that in all the stakeholders, be it the government, be it the end user and the OEMs, it creates a value for everyone. The only challenge we see is it has to be very clearly defined. If it's going to be open-ended, frankly, it's like, frankly, it will not give us results. It will be as the situation remains as on today. So policy with a particular number of years, maybe 15 years, 10 years, whatever, has to be clearly defined. There needs to be a clear-cut demarcation, what all is expected, and when will the vehicles become ELV. That, I think, is something which we need the support from the government. If it's going to be voluntarily, and if it's going to be a policy where people have their own choices, that's fair. We won't be able to force anything on the people. But then in that case, this industry, frankly speaking, will not be able to take it off in the next 3 years or 4 years. It will take its own time, and by the time, I think India should not be behind. So that is one concern we do have, and I'm raising that as a part of strategy as we move forward. The other one is very, very important. As we formalize, or maybe you will have more private investments coming in, it's very important to have the unorganized markets people involvement also. It is very important to integrate those people. We will never succeed if we don't integrate the unorganized markets today. And so that's where we started. When we started, we were very clear that we want to have those guys as our business partners. And the whole concept of Cero is in the region, at least in the NCR region, is to look at how we can grow with them. And the same model we would look at taking across now to Chennai. So we are now looking at expanding to 25. We already have a collection center up and running in Chennai. We're looking at expansions of another 3 or 4 in this year in a very frugal manner, I would say. And also looking at how we can realign our policies to the unorganized sectors.
Absolutely. So, Mehta, I request you to please conclude in 1 minute.
Yeah, no problem. So coming on the last 2 slides, Monica, the other one is on the incentivizing for the public for scrapping. That means support from the government in form of subsidies or in terms of GST. I know it's very touchy subject, so frankly, we can't expect much, but anything on that side will be great. And again, on the support from OEMs also need to play a part in this, and I'm sure they will be able to do that. All in all, I think this is my concluding slide. It's a win-win for everyone. It will improve scrap availability. It will improve domestic production, basically under Atmanirbhar. It will increase incomes from collection of taxes by sales of new vehicle. It will reduce the scrap imports. There will be a lot of generation of employment. And lastly, and the most important, is a lot of natural resource will be saved. That's all. That's all from Cero. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sumit sir, for showing the efforts taken by MSTC and Mahindra under the joint venture. Now I request you to please mute your mic, and we will quickly move on to our next panelist. Viewers, we have Mr. Sanjay Mehta. I'll give you a little brief about Mr. Sanjay Mehta. He's a president at Material Recycling Association of India and serving as a director at FTC Group. Mr. Sanjay Mehta holds a bachelor degree in commerce and brings along a vast experience of more than 30 years in ferrous metal scrap recycling trade in India and international trade. Mr. Sanjay Mehta is serving as a director at MTC Group, a 44-year-old business group with annual turnover exceeding to rupees 7,000 crores, employing more than 5,000 people in the company, in the group. I request you, Mr. Sanjay Mehta, to please unmute your mic and say over to you.
Thank you, Monica. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Monica, for inviting MRAI to this conference. As we all know, MRAI is the Apex National Association of India, representing the interest of all recycling industry with over 1,200 members, including most regional trade products associations. Our collective strength comprises of over 20,000 industries, medium, large, and small, directly and indirectly employing over 25 lakh people. Today, we would like to highlight the secondary steel industry's social and environmental benefits, challenging issues, and seeking policy support from the Government of India in the places of various government and other dignitaries. Metal recycling industries facing various challenges and its unviable cost of scrap due to import duties. That is what I would like to harpen on this issue as a MRAI, hurting to the domestic ferrous metal recycling industry at weaker section of employment society as well. Today, we are living in the rapidly changing world with infinite resources. At the same time, improvement in standards of living combined with population growth, expert pressure on our ecosystem. Among all consumption of material, steel metal is everywhere in our lives, and it's at the heart of our sustainable future. Steel material is playing an important role in the circular economy as it can be used, reused, and recycled infinitely. It encourages the reuse and recycling of materials. All fundamental advantage of using steel is enumerable. It is also playing an important role in the resource efficiency, and its main product, that is steel, can be recycled even after its end of life into usable products as well as other waste or byproducts developed during production of steel, known as slag or fuel gases, can be used in several applications. While steel making from the primary route consumes large quantity of basic raw material like natural resources, iron ore, coal, as compared to use steel in the form of scrap is the secondary raw material from the steel industry. As we understand that steel is 100% recyclable and can be recycled repeatedly to a new steel products in a closed material loop, recycled steel maintains the inherent properties of the original steel. Benefits of steel scrap is various. The use of every ton of scrap shall have 1.1 ton of iron ore, 630 kg of coking coal, and 55 kg of limestone. That we all know that it saves various economic things. As a result, steel is the most recyclable material in the world. Over 650 million metric ton of steel are recycled annually, including pre- and post-consumer scrap. Most of the major steel producing countries like Japan, USA, and China are continuously increasing scrap-based steel productions with proportionate production from the primary route also. Similarly, the efficient use of scrap for steel production becomes very crucial for India, as 35 to 40% share has been invoiced from scrap-based steel production in the journey of 300 million metric tons by 2030. The main countries adopting primary induction arc furnace as a secondary route, over 70 to 90% are USA, Italy, Spain, Iran, Mexico, and Middle East. Looking at the India secondary steel industry, characterized by the presence of many small steel producers who utilize scrap with over inputs of EAF and IF route for steel making. As on March 2019, India has 47 electric arc furnaces and 1,128 induction furnace units, which are largely dependent on ferrous scrap as a raw material to produce steel. There are various challenges faced by the steel recycling industry. We need to enhance our per capita steel consumption, which is much below the average, world average, but now increasing slowly. We expect this per capita steel consumption is likely to be increased from existing level of 68 kg to 160 to 180 kg by 2030-31, as advised in the steel scrap policy by the Steel Ministry. Target is tough, looking into various challenges faced by the industry. As we all are aware that COVID-19 crisis are far beyond financial losses, and it has almost pushed the economy back by a few years. This crisis comes with opportunities for business and more growth depending on how we take it. But manufacturing sector, or rather secondary sector, incurring loss due to disruption of demand supply chain. It has also decreased the working and production capacity of almost all business after the lockdown, with many new norms in terms of health precautions, and due to that, cost has gone up severely. Banks, while providing loan on additional working capital, are applying stringent norms. Among other challenging issues, bottlenecks in logistics like higher handling charges is causing a problem in supply chain and in post-COVID, and is ultimately increasing the production cost as well. We must need to understand that our secondary sector are not listed, neither having public money. Instead, they are working with their own money or bank finance. So every penny is important for us, and we are working from plants only and personally involved in every activity to take care of the cost. There is an urgently need, as we all have spoken regarding need for vehicle recycling policy urgently, and definitely government is looking into that. MRAI suggestions related to steel scrap in order to safeguard our steel making natural resources like iron ore. MRAI suggesting to remove the import duty on ferrous scrap to nil, which is now 2.5%. We would like to highlight the following points in support of our request. World over, the custom duty on import of metal scrap is nil. The secondary metal producers largely rely on imported scrap as its basic raw material due to non-availability of good quality domestic scrap in sufficient quantity. We urge the government secondary steel recyclers should be allowed to import ferrous scrap as per ISRI specifications, as Madam also speaks on the same. As we have already presented to the government all the solutions to overcome the problem faced by the secondary steel industry, which include concrete expenditure plans in housing for all under Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana scheme, will boost the demand of secondary steel products, secondary road and rail infrastructure, irrigation facilities, world-class business conventional center across India, and sector-wise industrial hubs. Government should focus on developing circular economic parks where recycling should be top priority. By doing so, all the parameters to Make in India and Atmanirbhar Bharat mission can be achieved. We are also recommending to create infrastructure and assets development projects to cater to our Indian populations like school, colleges, airports, hospitals, and many things. In addition to above, we also request Steel Ministry to either separate package for secondary steel units falling under MSME, or to increase limit of rupees 500 crores, as most of the secondary steel industry don't meet the criteria of the new MSME definition of rupees 250 crores. Our industry's high turnover and less margin, very low margin of around 1 to 2%. So it is very necessary to include secondary steel sector under MSME criteria for development. Some of the PUCs like NTPC still ask for a minimum steel production capacity of 1 million tons per annum. In the steel supply tenders, none of the secondary steel producers have much higher capacity. Though government has moved out in 2016 saying that there is no primary, secondary or captive steel plants category, but still many PSUs are falling same. Madam, thrust should be given on quality parameters of steel, not the route of steel productions. Ministry has already issued an order in this regard 2016, but several PSUs and government departments like BHEL, BRO, Indian Railways have maintained primary producers, primary source of raw material requirement in their steel purchase tenders. Further, PSUs like IOCL, IRCON ask very high value of single order, past supply experience to qualify their steel supply tenders. This qualification requirement is many times more than 20% of the purchase quantity, that is tender quantity. Steel Ministry should issue order to all PSUs and contractors involved in all tenders of steels that they should only insist on quality parameters rather than route of productions and any other stringent norms which affect involvement of secondary steel units in such tenders compulsory. In order to boost the Indian economy, we hereby request the government to kindly give extra support incentives to the secondary steel industry, thereby promoting exports and increasing demand of Indian secondary steel productions to utilize 100% capacity. Till next 1 year, we will have to live with the COVID, and domestic demand will comparatively low, as more exports will take care of the productions if more incentives is given. MRAI recommends Ministry of Steel to adopt ESRI guidelines. That is what Madam has already spoken. We strongly recommend to execute the National Material Recycling Policy drafted by Niti Aayog, KPMG, and MRAI is the need of the hour, along with the steel scrap policy which is implemented. This policy has been drafted to take care and upliftment of all stakeholders involved in recycling chain, from rag pickers to collection yards to shredders and consumers. This policy has allotted rights and responsibilities to all concerned ministries who will work for betterment of recycling industry. This policy will create more recycling parks, clusters at every outskirts of the city, which will streamline the scrap availability in the domestic market. MRAI suggests for the recognition of various stakeholders, which includes scrap generators, independent traders, scrap users. All the stakeholders involved should be allowed to participate in the scrap recycling process as a general thumb rule. Recently, Honorable Steel Minister Sri Dharmendra Pradhanji made announcement of a draft framework policy for development of steel clusters in the country that will help to increase productions of value-added steel and generate various employment. Such draft framework policy aims at facilitating setting up of greenfield steel clusters along with development and expansion of existing steel clusters as well. In line with the Eastern steel clusters, MRAI requests the Steel Ministry to identify certain regions like Kandla or in South India also. And government may consider to grant SEZ status to so-called recycling parks which can be started. We expect the government to announce tax incentives to attract more capital investments at such recycling parks as well. Therefore, MRAI suggests that the execution of National Material Recycling Policy to be implemented for the smooth functioning of the recycling industry in whole. To reach 300 million metric ton productions, we will need steel scrap from present level of around 30 million tons to more than 70 million tons by 2030, a requirement. Thus, this policy aims to help all stakeholders engaged in collection, dismantling, processing, transportation, so that sustainable development of scrap-based steel industry can be ensured. It is expected that the implementation of this policy shall make countries self-reliant in terms of availability of scrap, and thus government will boost to import substitution, incentivize and creating large employment opportunities. It is also important to note that stimulus package of rupees 20 lakh crore announced by the government has not helped the secondary steel industry directly, but the announcement will surely help in creating the demand for steel products in the country indirectly in the near future at a very high level. Lastly, looking into all these positive aspects of the secondary steel contribution, we expect Steel Ministry and your good self to give out most attention to sector. All our suggestions are workable. We require all the above indirect benefits just for a period of 1 year to 18 months till market generates its own demand post-pandemic. Without such support, the secondary steel industry will be paralyzed, and we request the government not to delay in taking decisions on the policy and all above suggestions for the benefits of industry and nation. Thank you very much for the patient sharing. Thank you, Monica.
Thank you so much, Sanjay sir, for giving a long list of recommendations. And I'm sure people are listening, government is listening, and I really hope they will take it into consideration. And yes, one thing which reminds me, the segregation and categorization of the industry of primary and secondary is not based on any other factor, but the route of production, which is being technically recognized. Anyways, we will move on to our next panelist. Thank you, Sanjay ji. I request you to please mute your mic. We have Mr. Ivy Rao. I'll give a little introduction of Mr. Ivy Rao. He's an MTech in mechanical design from IIT Kanpur and graduate in mechanical engineering from Osmania University, Hyderabad. Over 36 years of experience in auto industry, joined Maruti in 1983 and has superheaded the R&D activities at Maruti Suzuki India Limited, led the R&D team as Senior Manager, Executive Officer till 2012, continued as Executive Advisor from 2012 to 19, played a key role in formation of Maruti Suzuki Toyota India Limited, a joint venture with Toyota Tsushoho Corporation for end-of-life vehicle scrapping. The plant will get commissioned by year-end. He is a visiting senior fellow in Center of Sustainable Mobility Group of TERI. I request you, Mr. Rao, to please unmute your mic, and it's over to you.
Thank you, Monica. Thanks for giving me this opportunity to be part of this panel discussion about steel scrap reprocessing. As Monica mentioned, I am presently with TERI in their Center for Sustainable Mobility. TERI is actually involved in resource optimization and closely working on end-of-life vehicle scrappage policy. Mr. Sumit Issar has made my job easy by sharing most of the details about the auto industry, the number of vehicles which are scrappable now, and also what are the main issues. I will try my best to not repeat what he has already spoken, but I'm sure it's going to be slightly difficult for me. Anyhow, I will start from the other end. The ELV policy notification from MORTH is long pending. We are made to understand that is under discussion. It is under discussion for more than a decade now. And as mentioned by Honorable Minister recently, the policy proposal is in the final phase of approvals. To give some background, in developed countries, the vehicle gets re-registered based on health check of the vehicle. So it is the customer who decides to scrap the vehicle to avoid high maintenance costs required for certification for re-registration. This would require inspection and certification centers for checking the vehicles for re-registration. In absence of these facilities in India now, the best criteria for scrappage in current situation for India would be the age, to phase out old vehicles not meeting the stringent emission regulations. In India, we generally never part with anything for scrappage. We expect some return on everything we part with, including newspapers, which we read, and once in 2 months we try to sell the papers. Only government regulation can trigger the scrappage of old vehicles in big numbers. Expectations of customers from ELV would depend upon what incentive the government is offering or what discount the OEM dealer would extend for purchase of a new vehicle against end-of-life vehicle scrappage. The announcement of this policy and its implementation would trigger a lot of improvements which are long overdue. All old vehicles, as I mentioned, do not meet the recent more stringent emission norms like BS4 and BS6. And in addition, most of the safety regulations have been implemented in last 10 to 15 years. With phasing out of the older vehicles, say vehicles which are older than 15 years or 20 years, the vehicle population on the roads would become comparatively less polluting and safer to drive. This may also trigger much needed boost to the vehicle sales when the industry is facing degrowth for last 2 years. This would revive the industry and employment generation, etc. There are some scrappage centers in operation, and Mr. Sumit Issar talked about Mahindra Center, and some are under construction to be operational very soon. I had an opportunity to study the business case for setting up end-of-life vehicle scrappage center, which ended in a joint venture between Maruti and Toyota Group Company, Toyota Tuso Corporation, which is a Toyota Group company. It's known internationally for its end-of-life vehicle activities and scrap trading in different countries. The joint venture is being set up in Noida and would be operational by year-end. I want to highlight some of the issues related with the end-of-life vehicle scrappage. In case of end-of-life vehicle scrappage center, it is required to have these centers spread all over the country to optimize end-of-life vehicles transportation cost to the scrappage center to improve the margin. The Noida scrappage center is expected to process about 2,000 vehicles per month, and the basic idea is to duplicate such centers in different locations. In Maruti's ELV scrappage center, we will dismantle and segregate manually all other materials from steel, as we feel manual dismantling is the best to dismantle and segregate. In Japan, US, and EU, due to higher labor costs, shredder machine is being used instead of dismantling and compacting. But the cost of shredder machine is very, very high, and also its capacity to shred is very high. And at this juncture, when the scrappage is just starting, I think investment for shredder will not be economically viable, as it will be idling most of the time. Typically, the Indian vehicles which would come for scrappage initially will have about 65 to 70% steel, majorly body, which is mostly steel sheets. And as some speakers already mentioned, from all this cost saving would be in terms of reduced raw material use, minimized resource input costs, reduced energy consumption to tune of 70%, and most importantly, reduced CO2 emissions by about 85% compared to if you are making steel from ore. And also it would reduce our dependency on scrap imports. Every ton of steel recovered from scrap would save about 1.2 tons of ore, 0.5 tons of coke, 0.2 tons of lime, and about 1.8 tons of CO2, resulting, paving way for circular economy. In Japan, big steel mills accept the end-of-life vehicle steel scrap, including some plastic and other materials, and with government help, the automotive shredder residue treatment fee gets paid to the steel mill. Actually, in Japan, when the vehicle is being sold to the first customer, they charge some money reserved for the end-of-life vehicle treatment. That is what is called this Issar treatment fees, and which is paid to the scrappage center as soon as they deflate the airbags and remove the air conditioning fluid. In India, due to limitation of furnace size, it may be difficult for steel mills to accept the end-of-life vehicle compactor steel body with plastic or other contaminations. So government should extend support to the steel mills for increasing the size of furnace per compacted body. The bigger furnace will also help enhance production of secondary steel, which is good, as mentioned earlier, for sustainability and energy efficiency. The availability of scrap is a major issue in India, and there is a shortage of about 7 to 10 million tons, due to which government had to import scrap worth about 25,000 crores. For steel output to grow as planned, India's electric arc furnace output has to rise by at least by 16 million tons per year, which can actually be achieved if existing mills raise their capacities, but they will need more scrap, and end-of-life vehicles scrap center should be able to fill the gap and replace the import of scrap steel for electric furnaces. All this would be possible if the government comes out with a very clear scrappage policy, which would trigger the customers to surrender their old vehicles. In many parts of the city and country, we can see a lot of vehicles parked which are not being used for years. So they can not be used at all on the road, and they have to be scrapped. But right now, because there is no trigger from anywhere, the customers, are keeping those vehicles parked. The secondary route steel product quality
Rao,
standardization.
sorry to interrupt. Rao, I request you to please conclude in 1 minute.
Yeah, sure. The secondary route steel product quality standardization is extremely critical if it has to compete with the primary steel products. There is a greater need for collaboration between stakeholders like National Institutes of Secondary Steel Technology, BIS, major primary and secondary steel manufacturers, to come together for various product testing and their standardization. On average, each end-of-life vehicle is likely to yield about 600 to 700 kg of good quality steel. If steel scrap from end-of-life vehicles is processed properly for reuse, will result in reuse of saving of resource otherwise required for making the steel, starting with ore, and a lot of energy is saved, and most importantly, a lot of CO2 emissions are drastically reduced. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Rao. And now we will quickly move on to our next speaker. I request other speakers who are Mr. Reinoud, Ritesh, and Archit to please maintain the time so that we can have little time for Q&A as well. Now we have Mr. Reinoud Pijpers. He is a director at International Ship Recycling Association. He has studied public administration at the University of Amsterdam. Reinoud has been active, participating in various international tribunals during his professional career working for the Netherlands government. He was active in preparing and attending several meetings for the ministries in the EU in Brussels, intensive contacts with members of European Parliament, attending meetings in the framework of the OECD, participation in the preparation of Hong Kong Convention in the IMO in London, and the various session of the joint ILO, IMO and Basel Convention Working Group on ship recycling, ship scrapping in London. Now I request you, Mr. Reinoud, to please unmute your mic. And Mr. Reinoud is having a presentation, so I'm making you a presenter. Please keep your PPT open.
Yes, you can see me, so. Can you hear me?
Yeah, so I've made you a presenter. You can, yes. Yes, it's visible. It is visible to us. Yes, absolutely. You can start.
Thank you very much for giving me the floor. Thank you, all the colleagues for the larger part of India. I want to say some few words about the International Ship Recycling Association. I will be very short because we have some time left for questions and answers. The role of ISRA is, I think, very important. The International Ship Recycling Association has as main objective to promote sound and safe recycling of ships. The founding fathers came from various countries, Turkey, the Netherlands, and China, and other countries. If you say we're promoting sound and safe ship recycling, then we are saying we have, as Issar yards, as Issar ship recycling facilities, the highest standards. Issar yards have made a lot of investments for sound and safe recycling, like impermeable for special asbestos treatment, down waste treatment, very important, and other heavy investments to see that all things are done properly and properly well. So this means that we have to invest, and we have to invest. That means we have no level playing field, and we have to compete with those yards, with those facilities who do not have to invest on environment or safe working conditions like it is done on the beaches. I'm now showing you something which was published in the TradeWinds paper, and it was coming from India. And I think that this is a very important statement, because he says that ship recycling costs money. If you are a ship owner and you are a sustainable ship owner, you also should reserve money to make sound and safe recycling possible. So he claims that ship owners should be open to negotiate on prices, because in this case, he invested in a Hong Kong Convention ship recycling facility. But like other members of Issar, he is confronted with ship owners who do not want to pay for it. That is, I think, one of the main issues at this moment. So what we see as Issar as very important, that strict regulation is a means to achieve a level playing field. In the past, Issar was active preparing the Hong Kong Convention, or members of Issar, but later become Issar, individuals were active to prepare the Hong Kong Convention. We have been active in the EU in formulating the strict policy of the EU, and in general, we see that if you have regulation, you also should have good enforcement policies. If we look at the Hong Kong Convention, then Issar sees this as a very good step in the good direction. I think through the Hong Kong Convention, sound and safe recycling of ships is globally now on the map. You cannot ignore it anymore. So the strength of the Hong Kong Convention is that ship recycling has been improved, and it is an undeniable step in the good direction. The weakness is that the state is the one who approves the facility itself, and lacking of an independent judgment, like we see with the EU yards. And we don't see an equivalent level of control as within the EU regulation. Because Issar has high standards, we support the European Commission for extending the EU list. The EU list facilitating yards to get approved by recycling ship flying the flag of a European country. The Commission has a set of strict criteria. They are put in the regulation, but also in the technical requirements. And the technical requirements are clear and unambiguous. Of course, we do not want to see political involvements. We just want to see as clear-cut the regulation and the requirements to approve a list, to approve facility to become on the EU list. Issar will closely stay on monitoring this process, because it's very important for a global level playing field. Then another point of the EU regulation is that the enforcement is weak. When we see a possible infringement made by a ship owner, nothing is done. We have good regulations, but a very lack on enforcement. And cooperation, the necessary cooperation between the member states in the EU in the EU is very weak and needs to be improved. I think that that will be one of the main issues for the coming period, and we see there a role for the European Commission to see that the member states are doing their work properly. I think that this shorter presentation of mine is, I think, the essence of what Issar is about. So high standards and a good regulation and good enforcement. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Reinoud, for keeping the time and promise.
Yes.
It was a wonderful presentation, which we will also be sharing with all of our panelists and participants later after the webinar. Now we will quickly move on to our next panelist. We have Mr. Ritesh Mahenshwari, Executive Director, International Trade at Shabro Metals and Technologies. Mr. Ritesh Mahenshwari, mathematics honors graduate from prestigious St. Stephen College in New Delhi, an MBA in Finance and Marketing, has a commodities metallics. Marketing has the commodities, the metallic portfolio in the company. He is responsible for various facets of the business, including development of new commodities, operational management, and in-house research and analytics. Mr. Ritesh Mahenshwari, it's over to you.
Yeah. Hi, Monica. Good afternoon to all the eminent panelists, as well as all the guests who are listening to our webinar. I must compliment you, Monica, for organizing this session. Very well organized, and we have a very good panel of distinguished guests, including with Ms. Ruchika ji, madam. So we've all heard about in this session the importance of scrap and the importance of scrap recycling. So thank God I as a speaker don't have to dwell more into it, because I come from a trading background and I represent more on the trading side of the things. So I'm here to talk about some numbers, some importance of how India is placed in the global economy and in terms of scrap usage. So as my eminent colleague, Mr. Sanjay ji, pointed out, that we have close to around 1,200 induction furnaces and close to about 47 to 50 electric arc furnaces, representing close to 55% of India's roughly around 111, 112 million tons of steel production. It is very natural to assume that the share of electric arc furnaces and the secondary route is going to stay here, probably going to slightly decrease or slightly increase over the next 4 or 5 years. But one cannot rule out the importance of the secondary sector, especially in India's context for steel production. So as we see the supply demand scenario in the coming 4 or 5 years, as all of us have pointed out, that there's going to be a persistent shortage of scrap, and India is going to be consistently relying on imports. So talking about current levels, last year we did 7.5 million tons of scrap import. This year, even after COVID situation, I do expect roughly around 5.5, 6 million tons of scrap, or maybe around 5 million tons of scrap should be coming back to our countries, sure, because the users of scrap have started operations, but the users of steel products are operating with a slight time lag. Right now, the current steel production in India is operating at around 80-85%. And as far as demand is concerned, we are seeing sporadic buying from all our buyers across India, from north to south, depending on everybody is buying on need basis. For instance, currently the prices of shredded scrap are hovering around 306 to 310 US dollars per metric ton on CFR India, whereas domestic scrap prices are close to roughly around 22,500, 23,000 or 24,000 rupees. So if you look at the parity, taking into account the custom duty as well as the dollar conversion rate, we find that imported scrap is still a bit expensive. Having said that, the supply side dynamics prevent ample amount of ability of domestic scrap to be available. Hence, we have buying interest from the buyers coming on and off basis. India remains funneled between two very important countries, Pakistan and Bangladesh, as far as scrap imports is concerned. So it's a new kind of era where new dynamics are emerging, where Indian buyers eventually also have to compete with buyers based in Pakistan and Bangladesh to get good quality scrap from the scrap yards located across the globe. Now, Coming from the quality of the scrap, one important aspect which I want to highlight over here is, as our industry is maturing slowly and the customer requirements of all our steel mills is increasing and getting tougher more and more. So it is very natural for our mills and our consumers to become aware and to take a conscious call to move towards more cleaner or better grades of scrap to be used in their furnaces. I represent, I'm also a part of MRAI and I represent the trading body as well. So we as traders also have been totally always insisting our buyers to slowly and steadily move towards adoption of better grades of scrap, cleaner grades of scrap, so that their productivity, yields and quality results is much better. Now, in terms, and for that matter, even our MRAI has extensively worked with the government of India and the ministry to formulate the new BIS guidelines. They are going to be coming out very soon, and they are modeled basically on the lines of ISRI, wherein all domestic nomenclature of grades will be at par with what ISRI asks us to present. Overall, the trade scenario remains quite warm, quite acceptable. The buyers and sellers, there is a healthy market competition between the buyers as well as between the sellers. And we expect with the growing requirement of scrap industry in India, this trend will continue. The buyers will have to step up. The sellers also will have to take more quality cautious decisions to give good qualities of scrap to meet the ever-changing requirements of the buyers. So this is mostly what I have to say from the trade side of things. I've kept it short and simple, Monica. I hope you won't mind.
Thank you so much, Ritesh, and really great that you have also kept your time and has shared valuable inputs on the scrap trade front with numbers and pricing. We are getting a lot of questions which we would like to take up after once we will finish with Mr. Archit Aggarwal. So we will move on to quickly our next speaker. We have Mr. Archit Aggarwal. Mr. Archit Aggarwal is a business manager at Dev Energy for the solutions for steel melting shops, including scrap processing and pollution control system. In the past, Archit has been engaged in various national and international consulting assignments with companies like HILTI and Technova. Over the period, he has developed expertise in solution design and project implementation with a focus on steel manufacturing. Mr. Archit, I believe you also have a presentation to make. So I'm making you a panelist. I'm making you a presenter, and you may please unmute your mic.
Thank you so much, Monica. I would first like to confirm whether my screen is visible.
Absolutely, it's visible to us.
Right. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for inviting me here and share my thoughts and experiences about scrap processing. The dignitaries here shared a lot of insights on the imports of scrap, the trading of scrap, the policy behind scrap melting and steel processing. I would talk about what happens to steel when it is scrapped. So before that, I would like to talk about what Dev Energy does. Dev Energy is a company which expertise in providing innovative turnkey solutions for coal gasification, scrap processing, flue management or pollution control management, and engineered carbon. So we have been into the business of coal gasification for around 20 years and with around 200 plants across steel, ceramic, and aluminum industries. Based on our lot of interaction with the steel industry, we gathered a lot of expertise on steel melting. That is where the scrap processing and pollution control systems come into picture for steel melting shops. So let's talk about scrap. Where does scrap come from? So the scrap comes from household, white goods, the containers, steel containers that we use at home, the end of life vehicles, the construction scrap, the industrial scrap. Basically, as Ms. Govil said, that anything that is produced of steel can be recycled and can be used as scrap. So once the scrap is generated, what happens to the scrap? So basically, this scrap is melted in different types of furnaces, the small furnaces, the medium-sized induction furnaces, and the arc furnaces to produce different kinds of products. The small furnaces, which is usually less than 5-ton size, are used for making steel castings. The induction furnaces are majorly used for making construction steel, which is TMT bars, angles, channels, and beams. And usually arc furnaces are used to make high-grade alloy steels. So what is scrap processing and what are the methods that are available across the globe for processing the scrap? So scrap can be processed in 3 manners. One is hammering, one is blade shearing, the third one is compression. So for hammering, the machines required are shredding systems. For blade shearing, there are shearing machines. For compression, there are baling machines. I will next talk about what these machines do and what kind of scrap they provide. So when we talk about shredding, so basically in shredding, the light scrap, which is usually automotive scrap or the household goods scrap with density less than 0.6 tons per meter cube and thickness less than 8 mm, this scrap can be shredded, and what we get is a clean scrap free from any dust, rubber, plastic, or non-ferrous materials with the density of around 1 to 2 tons per meter cube. So shredding can be done by different methods. One is a shredding system, which is available in the world for capacities around 10 tons to 100 tons per hour. Input material less than 8 mm thickness, the output density 1 to 2, OPEX around 600 rupees per ton. So this system can give you clean scrap, which is usually used by arc furnaces for making high quality alloy steels. Then there are double shaft shredders, which are used for very light material with thickness of less than 6 mm, and they can give output up to 20 tons per hour with density of 1 tons per meter cube and OPEX of around 250 rupees per hour. Then there are pre-shredders. Pre-shredders, these are the machines which are basically used to break the scrap which cannot be shredded. Basically, the bales that come from the automobiles, the big cubes that come, this machine breaks them so that it can be further shredded to produce high quality scrap. Then we talk about shearing. So shearing, these machines are of 2 types. One are the machines which only break the scrap or cut the scrap to size it to be fed into the furnace. Then there are baler shears, which increase the density of the scrap and then shear it. So the most basic machines, alligator shears, these are manual machines, can cut long angles, channels, pipes with capacity of around 2 to 5 tons per hour, and these are very cost effective machines to cut a small quantity of scrap. Then there are container shears, which again
Archit, I request you to please conclude in 1 minute.
Sure. So container shears, these again are used to cut the scrap. Straight bed shears, these are big machines with capacity 10 to 50 tons per hour. Incline shears, again big machines to cut 10 to 50 tons per hour. The straight bed shears and the incline shears, these are the machines which increase the density of the scrap to a little bit extent, but not much extent. Then there comes box shears and wing shears, which increase the density of the scrap from 0.6 to 0.8 tons per meter cube to around 1.1, 1.2 tons per meter cube with OPEX of around 150 rupees per ton. Then there are milling machines, which are usually used to make the cubes out of sheet metal with high density output of around 2 tons per meter cube. There are two types of balers. One are continuous balers, which we keep on feeding the material in the hopper, and continuously the bales keep coming out with the density of greater than 2 tons per meter cube. Then there are lid balers, which are batch type balers. You feed the material and the bales come out of these machines. So these are the machines available in the world, and we are available to provide what kind of solution the industry is looking at. If somebody wants more details, they can give me a call anytime. Thank you so much, Monica ji. This is from me. I think I was in time.
Thank you so much, Archit ji. Let me just stop the sharing first. Just 1 second. Yeah. So we are already, 4:30, but we can try to take at least a few questions, and then we will wind up in 5 or 10 minutes. So we are doing a little extension for 5 or 10 minutes. So we have received a lot of questions from our attendees. So we will try to take as many as questions we can for our panelists. Okay, so first question I'm taking is from Mr. Subrata Mukhopadhyay. He is asking when it is expected to have sufficient scrap stock in India. Anybody can answer this question. You need to unmute your mic before answering it. So his question is when it is expected to have sufficient scrap stock in India. Ritesh, you like to address this?
Yeah, it's a very, I would say it's a hypothetical question. I think Sanjay ji will agree with me. There is no fixed prediction when you can have a sufficient amount of scrap in India, and how do you define the word sufficient is another question. But what is interesting to note is that how the end user is going to use the scrap and what kind of pricing are they willing to pay to use that kind of material to make the manufactured product. For somebody, getting a shredded scrap will be a very, very big boon, and they will be ready to pay a premium. But whereas for a very small furnace located in centrally located India, they'll be happy buying some local low-grade scrap which is very unprocessed, because their end-use market is very, very local. So it's impossible to predict when it's going to be India going to be, sufficient amount of stock. But yes, with the initiatives of the government and the recycling fraternity, as what MSTC is doing, we are slowly inching towards a situation where we are not going to get too much reliant on imports or dependent on imports. I think that's a very good positive support. I think Sanjay ji can more complement this.
संजय जी, आप कुछ कहना चाहेंगे इसके ऊपर कि हम इंडिया में स्क्रैप सफिशिएंसी कब होगी और कैसे होगी? You need to unmute your mic. Yeah.
Okay, Monica ji, this is always, yes, Ritesh has very well said, that it always depends upon the demand and supply, and we have to go as per the world parameters. The iron ore prices, coal prices, the other parameters also worked very well along with the scrap prices. So of course we are dependent on imports. We have to import about 15% of the scrap, 15 to 20% of the total requirement of the scrap from the international market, and that is evenly ELB system is going to give more scrap. But by that time we will have a more requirement of more material, so productions will go up. Like Steel Ministry has very well targeted 300 million tons till 2030. So we'll definitely require more scrap. That is what 70 million tons of scrap we will require. As of now, we are rising closely about 28 to 30 million tons plus whatever we are importing. So definitely it will always depend upon the demand and supply.
Absolutely. I think the scrap yards which are forming, and you have also set up a scrap yard in Bangalore. Moreover, we have MSTC, Mahindra, tie-up, and Maruti, Toyota. I think this will help us in generating the, I don't know whether we call it sufficient, but Sumit, if you like to add anything, or Mr. Ivy Rao?
No, Monica, so my view is very, very different in a sense. I don't see India having sufficient scrap in the next 4 or 5 years for sure. And the reason is, see, even when I compare countries like China and all, which with the kind of policies they have, they've been still not been able to get the scrap sufficiency at this stage. Of course, they're producing about 800 million. I think in India, we need to have a very strong policy. And unless and until we have that in place, you will have a lot of leakages happening, which is happening even today. I don't see in near future. I will be very happy in the next even 5 years. We move out 30-40% over current levels in terms of sufficiency. But India needs to go a long way, and there needs to be a very dramatic and drastic policy on that. There has to be a very clear-cut guideline. Without that, honestly, I don't think India will be self-sufficient.
Mr. Rao, you have any point to make? Just 1 second. Yeah. I think you have, sorry.
I agree with what Mr. Sumit said. What we lack and what we badly need right now is a very strong, clear policy from the government about scrappage policy as such. Somehow in India, we have a tendency to keep things which we don't need or we don't use for life. I mean, if you look at our households or any place, there are a lot of things which could have scrapped, but we somehow for sentimental reasons or other way, we keep keeping them. So if there is a government policy which spells out exactly about the scrappage of vehicles and such white goods, etc., maybe that will trigger people coming forward for scrapping their vehicles or other goods, and that will generate a lot of scrap.
Right, sir. We have got one question. Booking for shipload cargoes have dropped in the last few weeks. Has the consumption decreased or local generation has increased? This question is from Mr. Rajiv Reiniud. So this is on the scrap imports. He's asking, booking for shipload cargoes have dropped in last few weeks. So has the domestic consumption has increased or the load generation has increased? Anyone can answer.
Yeah, Monica, post-lockdown, there was a sudden drop of about, say, $40 in the market. And the prices were in the range of $300 pre-COVID also. So the prices have again come back to the $300, or you can say that they have moved to the $315 shaded price. Now it has softened by $5-10. But does not mean that there is a sufficient scrap availability of world over. Like Sumit sir has very well said that scrap is going to be definitely, I don't say that it is always been too much demand, but definitely it is part of our system. And we have to import as a, we don't have the robust policy, so we have to depend upon the imports. And the scrap prices are going to be hovering around, say, $275, $315, $320. Scrap prices will not go down. There is definitely cost is there for collection cost. So we have to pay the collection cost, trading cost, everything. So scrap prices are going to be definitely in the same range.
I'd like to understand from Mr. Reinoud. Mr. Reinoud, you're there? Yes. Can you hear me? Yeah. So what is the situation in Amsterdam when it comes to ship breaking? I'm pretty sure you might also be exporting and consuming locally. So what is the situation of ship breaking scrap at your area?
Well, in general, I can speak for my members, and we have
on behalf of your members,
very small member in the Netherlands, but we have members, of course, in Europe and in Turkey and in China, which has closed the borders for ship recycling. At this moment, due to COVID, we see that there's a strong increase for end-of-life ships to be recycled. And what we also see is that the most part of these ships go to the beaches and not to certified yards, which we do regret, of course. But this is a time where a huge amount of steel is coming onto the market because of the increase of the end-of-life ships to be recycled.
Right.
Yeah. So,
Monica, you have a point to make? Yeah.
Yeah. I had a point on your earlier question. So let me explain. I think yes, your Mehta was saying was right. Pre-COVID, you had a prices going down, and then of course the prices moved up to 312, 315, whatever level. And what we are now seeing in India, I think, is there's demand per se has actually been falling, and in the last 1 month or something, and also because with the kind of increases which has happened locally on steel products, now there's a lot of resistance. There's enough inventory in the system, and I do expect that the prices will actually fall in the next couple of months. Now it's already the softening you are able to see in Southeast Asia happening in a big way. China has already started softening in thing, and also in the other Asian markets. So I think the peak is actually gone, and it's going to be downward trend, and so people are actually destocking at this point of time. And I that's one of the reasons why you would see that the demand per se of imports will continue to be low.
Well, I have one question from my side. Sumitji, at Mahindra and MSTC joint venture, the scrap yard which you have set up at Greater Noida, what kind of scrap is being generated? Is it does it also include shipbreaking, automobile? If you could tell us a little bit about it. And this question is from Mr. Ivy Rao also for Maruti and Toyota after this. Yeah.
Okay. So at Noida and Chennai, where we are, we've already set up. We are actually supplying people high quality automotive scrap. We are not into shipbreaking scrap. That shipbreaking scrap, as you must be knowing, is basically the plates which are thicker materials. As of now, we are not doing that. Do we have a capacity up to a particular width, thickness? We can do that, but frankly, most of that is high grades of automotive steel. What we are planning now to do is, and we are now doing our recce, is to get into shipbreaking scrap. We have not formalized our strategy, but we do know there are markets like Alang and all, which generate a lot of scrap in and around that area, and we are looking at how we can actually enter that segment.
Sir, same question to Mr. Rao.
Yeah, the plan what we are setting up in Noida, we are initially planning to scrap and dismantle only passenger cars. And based on how the government policy comes up and how the so-called scrappage initiative spreads, we will decide, how to expand the capacity. Right now, it can take up to 2,000 vehicles per month. And we are also planning to duplicate similar facilities at different locations. Otherwise, we'll end up spending a lot of money transporting the end-of-life vehicles from one place to other place. So we do not have any plans of scrapping the ships, breaking ship bodies.
Okay, so I will take 2 more questions and then we will wind up the session. This question is from Dr. G.V. Rao, NMDC. He is asking, what are the challenges of segregation of scrap? As in, what challenges do you face when you segregate the scrap? Anyone can answer. We can take it one by one. Maybe we can start with Mr. Sanjay Mehta.
Monica, segregation, definitely, there are various challenges. It requires, along with technology, you require manpower also. And yes, there is a galvanized, tin coated, high carbon steel also comes in along with the scrap, whether it's shredded or whether it's HMS also. So mild steel producers, good quality steel manufacturers doesn't require high percentage of cast iron. So you need to segregate cast iron as well as the galvanized, more galvanized or say tin coated. Other particles, other non-ferrous metals attached with the ferrous, we have to need to segregate. So these are the challenges, and in that, along with the technology, we need to involve human manual also. That is what everywhere in India, that is what we do. So normally in fashion world, they are not doing it. That is why they are using more arc. They are more routing the productions through arc furnace. So here in India, the more production is through the induction route. So we need to use quality scrap only in the induction furnace. We cannot use
the scrap processing still needs to improve in India. That is the whole reason why we are importing so much of scrap. And the joint ventures and the new facility from Tata and Mahindra and Maruti, it will certainly, and you are also doing a pretty good job at MDC. So I believe this will help in segregating the scrap. Anyone else has a point to make?
I would like to add here.
Yeah, Archit.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I would like to add here, yes, segregating scrap is always a challenge. but at the end of the day, the whole objective of the scrap is to be melted. So the scrap has to be in the form in the furnace which is to be melted, whether it's an arc furnace or the induction furnace. As Mehta ji rightly said that most of the furnaces in India are the induction furnaces. So we have to segregate the scrap in the form which is suitable for the induction furnaces. For example, the hazardous materials, the shock absorbers and the materials containing oils, they have to be removed from the scrap before it is being melted. And the most important thing here is the scrap has to be sized and compressed, or its density and the sizing has to be done in the form which is suitable to that furnace. And it helps in the form of increasing the efficiency of the furnace, matching the power density and the melt rate of that furnace.
Great, great. Sumit, you were saying anything?
Yeah, just one quick point. See, there are very good technologies available worldwide, for segregating these scraps, but they come at a price. And our biggest concern is, and that's where we have been harping on this. Till the time actually this policy is enforceable, frankly, you can keep on investing in technology. The returns are going to be nothing. I actually we want to create a world-class infrastructure with the best technologies of segregating, making world-class quality scrap, but you will end up getting nothing, because on ELVs you can't make money. It's more of, it has to be a circular economy where everybody needs to put a little bit of money. And in developed economies, people actually charge some extra cost for the end-of-life vehicles. So India can also bring this technology. We can segregate the quality of scrap, but there needs to be a policy where government supports us, and otherwise this industry per se actually will never take off. And I'm very, very honest when I'm saying this.
I'm pretty sure, because technology plays an important role. I have one last question from Mr. Reinoud Pijpers. Since you're representing an association of ship recycling in Netherlands, what sort of support you are getting from the government, your own government? If you could tell us, maybe it may be helpful for us also, we could suggest to our government.
Okay,
some policy initiatives taken by the government.
Okay. Let me be very clear. It is the International Ship Recycling Association. We have members all over the world, first-class ship recyclers, and we are not supported by the government whatsoever. No, non-EU governments, non-local governments. We are just supported by our members, by the yards who do it in a responsible way.
Yeah, so is there any particular government policy you like to highlight which your government has taken an initiative?
I think that one of the most important policy for governments to do is that we have the technology, we have the technology to recycle end-of-life vessels on a responsible way. So let's use this technology and let governments see that they are in their influence and in their enforcement, that the ship recycling facilities do the right job.
Great, great. With this, I like to finish this session. It's been a little long, and I know we have crossed the time limit to almost 20 minutes. I really like to thank to all our esteemed panelists. We had viewers, Shri B.N. Satpathy, Senior Consultant, Office of Principal Scientific Advisor, Cabinet Secretariat at Government of India, Srimati Ruchika, Govil, IRS, Joint Secretary at Ministry of Steel at Government of India, Mr. Sumit Issar, MD at Mahindra, Accelo, Director at Cero, Recycling, Mr. Sanjay Mehta, President at MRAI and Director at MTC Group, Mr. I.V. Rao, Visiting Senior Fellow, TERI, former ex-advisor, Engineering and Director at Maruti, Center of Excellence, Mr. Reinoud Pijpers, Director of International Ship Recycling Association, Mr. Ritesh Mahenshwari, Executive Director, International Trade at Shabro Metals and Technologies, and Mr. Archit Aggarwal, Business Manager at Dev Energy. I like to thank our sponsors and advertisers, NMDC Limited, SMC Power Generation, Dave Energy, and associate partner MCT Group. With this, I'd like to thank you all for attending this webinar. Viewers, the recording of this webinar is available on our YouTube channel. You can visit to Metalogic PMS YouTube and visit and view the recording. With this, I end this session. Thank you so much. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Moving in speeds with new concepts in reaching greater heights. MTC Group. We value scrap.